Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to be told you don't belong? What happens when the one person everyone dismissed becomes the only person who can save them all? This is the story of Alara, and it begins in the quietest corner of the most ambitious place on Earth. In the sprawling, sterile campus of the Global Space Agency, where rockets dreamed of touching stars, Alara Vance was a ghost. She haunted the sublevel archives, a digital catacomb filled with the ghosts of missions past. Her official title was Junior Archival Technician, a label so bland it was designed to be forgotten. She was the person who digitized forgotten flight plans from the 70s and cataloged telemetry data from defunct satellites. Her workspace was a small, gray cubicle squeezed between humming servers and shelves of dusty data drives. The air tasted of ozone and old paper. Most days, the only conversations she had were with the blinking cursor on her terminal. But within this forgotten corner, Alara was not a ghost. She was a maestro. When she looked at data, she didn't just see numbers and code. She saw symphonies. She heard melodies in the chaotic static of deep space transmissions and saw colors in the architecture of complex algorithms. To her, a stream of telemetry was a living river, with currents and eddies that told a story no one else was listening to. This unique perception was her secret, a gift she couldn't explain, and had learned long ago to hide. It made others uncomfortable, it made her seem strange. So she kept it to herself, a private concert playing constantly in the back of her mind. Her entire world, her entire focus, was poured into one single, magnificent project, the Odyssey probe. It was the GSA's magnum opus, a multi-billion-dollar messenger being sent to Proxima Centauri's orbit, carrying a payload of instruments so sensitive they could supposedly detect the echoes of the Big Bang. For 2 years, Alara had lived and breathed Odyssey. Though she was nowhere near the core team, she had used her archival access to study every schematic, every line of code, every preliminary test run. She knew the probe more intimately than the engineers who built it. She felt its potential like a hum in her bones. She had charted its projected path through the cosmos not as a line on a graph, but as a grand, sweeping crescendo of exploration. She had run her own clandestine simulations on her modest terminal, pushing the boundaries of the official models, exploring the what-ifs that the primary team, with their rigid adherence to established probabilities, had deemed statistically insignificant. It was in one of these deep, unsanctioned dives into the data that she found it. A whisper. A tiny, almost imperceptible flaw in the mission's trajectory calculations. It was a pattern hidden deep within the simulated solar wind data, a harmonic dissonance that suggested the probe would encounter a pocket of charged plasma far more volatile than the official forecasts predicted. To everyone else, it was random noise. To Alara, it was a sour note in the symphony, a clear warning of a catastrophic failure. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just a technical problem, it was a threat to the dream. She spent a week verifying her findings, losing sleep, her meals forgotten, the world outside her basement office ceasing to exist. The pattern held. It was real. She had to warn them. The journey from the archives to the Odyssey Mission Control Center was like traveling between worlds. She left her subterranean realm of silence and dust and ascended into a cathedral of glass and light. The main operations floor was a vast, amphitheater-style room, dominated by a wall of screens displaying the Earth from orbit, countless data streams, and a gleaming, perfect render of the Odyssey probe against a backdrop of stars. The air here was different, charged with ambition, intellect, and an almost unbearable tension. People moved with sharp, decisive energy. No one ambled, they strode. No one spoke, they declared. It was the domain of Commander Eva Thorne, a legend in her own right. Thorne was a woman forged in the crucible of space itself, a former astronaut who had walked on the moon, and now commanded the GSA's most critical missions. She stood at the center of the room, a pillar of calm authority, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missing nothing. She was listening intently to the man beside her, the mission's lead strategist, Marcus Vance. Marcus Vance was everything Alara was not. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of unshakable confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was a prodigy of theoretical astrophysics, a man who trusted his models and his intellect above all else. He saw the universe as a complex but ultimately solvable equation, and he believed he was one of the few people capable of solving it. When he spoke, his voice filled the room, smooth and certain. He was explaining a minor course correction, his hands gesturing toward the main screen with the casual grace of a conductor. He was the gatekeeper of the mission, and Alara knew, with a sinking feeling, that he was the mountain she would have to move. She took a deep breath, clutching a data slate containing her findings, its cool metal a stark contrast to her clammy palms. She approached the inner circle, her worn boots silent on the polished floor. She felt a dozen pairs of eyes flicker over her, registering her simple, low-level uniform, and dismissing her in an instant. She was an anomaly here, a janitor stumbling into the operating theater. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was swallowed by the room's ambient hum. She tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance." Marcus paused mid-sentence, turning slowly. His eyes, a cool, dismissive blue, scanned her from head to toe. A faint, condescending smile played on his lips. "Can I help you?" The question wasn't an offer, it was a challenge. Standing before him, Alara felt herself shrink. All the certainty she felt in her basement sanctuary evaporated under his gaze. The symphony in her head faltered, replaced by the deafening thrum of her own anxiety. She held up the data slate. "Mr. Vance, I found something in the solar wind simulations. A resonance pattern. I believe the probe's trajectory intersects with a previously unmodeled plasma field. The magnetic shielding might not hold." Marcus didn't even glance at the slate. He looked past her, at Commander Thorne, with an expression of weary amusement. "We have interns running wild again, Commander." Laughter rippled through the nearby technicians. Alara's face burned with humiliation. "I'm not an intern," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm in archival data. I cross-referenced the simulation with deep-range sensor logs from the Voyager program. There's a correlation." Marcus cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Archival data? Young lady, we are running the most sophisticated predictive models in human history. They are vetted by a team of 50 of the world's best astrophysicists. You're telling me you found something they all missed while digging through digital dust?" His tone was laced with derision. He was performing for the room, reinforcing his own authority by tearing hers down. "It's not in the models because the variables are considered statistically insignificant," Alara pressed, her desperation making her bold. "But they're not random. They have a structure. It's like a harmonic. It builds." "I think the official forecast is wrong." Commander Thorne, who had been watching the exchange in silence, finally spoke. Her voice was low and steady, cutting through the tension. "Let me see the slate." Alara's heart leaped with a flicker of hope. She stepped forward and handed it to Thorne. The commander's eyes scanned the complex charts and waveform analyses. For a moment, her brow furrowed. She saw something, a flicker of the pattern that Alara had so painstakingly uncovered. She looked from the slate to Alara, her gaze intense, searching. Marcus stepped in, placing a hand lightly on Thorne's arm. "Commander, with all due respect, we are 3 weeks from launch. We cannot afford to chase down phantom theories from the archives department. The models are solid. This is a waste of our time." He turned his full, dismissive glare back on Alara. "Your creativity is noted. But you are out of your depth. Go back to your files." The words struck Alara like a physical blow. Out of your depth. He hadn't just dismissed her work, he had dismissed her entire existence. He had drawn a line, placing her firmly on the outside. Thorne hesitated, her eyes still on the slate. She was a woman who trusted her gut, and something about the girl's desperate sincerity, something in the strange, musical way she described the data, resonated with a past failure, a time when she had ignored a similar whisper of warning and paid a terrible price. But the logic, the sheer weight of her expert team, was against it. The launch was too close. The political and financial pressure was immense. She couldn't derail the world's most anticipated mission based on a hunch from a junior technician. She handed the slate back to Alara, her expression hardening into one of professional resolve. Mr. Vance is right. Our focus needs to be on the established parameters. Thank you for your diligence, Miss Vance, Alara whispered. Alara Vance. Marcus's smile tightened at the shared surname, a fact he clearly found distasteful. Thank you, Miss Vance, Thorne said, her tone final. You may return to your duties. The walk back to the archives was the longest of Alara's life. Every step was a fresh wave of humiliation. The laughter, the condescending smiles, Marcus's cutting words, they echoed in the silent corridors. Out of your depth, go back to your files. She had dared to step into the light, and they had slammed the door in her face, casting her back into the shadows where they believed she belonged. She reached her gray cubicle, the familiar hum of the servers now sounding like a mournful dirge. She slumped into her chair, the symphony in her head completely gone, replaced by a hollow, painful silence. She had failed. Not just in her attempt to warn them, but in her attempt to be seen. The dismissal was more than professional, it was personal. It was a confirmation of her deepest fear, that she was, and always would be, invisible. The next morning, a formal email was waiting in her inbox. It was from Marcus Vance's office. Subject: reassignment of duties. The text was cold and clinical. It stated that due to her unauthorized use of computational resources and disruption of core mission operations, her access privileges to all active Odyssey project files were being revoked. She was being formally firewalled from the mission. Furthermore, her duties were now exclusively restricted to the pre-digital archives, physical paper logs and magnetic tapes from the 1960s. It was a punishment. A deliberate, targeted act of professional banishment. He wasn't just putting her back in her place, he was burying her in it. The message was clear: you are not one of us. You do not get to touch our dream. A profound sense of loss washed over Alara, so powerful it left her breathless. The Odyssey probe was more than a machine to her, it was a part of her. And now that part was being surgically removed. The days that followed were a blur of numb routine. She went to her new, even more isolated station in a deeper, dustier part of the archives. She handled brittle, yellowed paper and listened to the hiss of ancient tapes. The vibrant, colorful world of data she had inhabited was replaced by a monochrome existence. She watched the launch on a small, grainy monitor in the archives break room, alone. She saw the rocket tear a hole in the sky, a glorious pillar of fire and hope. On the screen, she could see the celebration in mission control. Marcus Vance was front and center, accepting congratulations, a triumphant smile on his face. Commander Thorne stood slightly apart, her expression unreadable as she watched the telemetry, a lone figure of responsibility amidst the jubilation. Alara felt a tear slide down her cheek. It was a tear of pride for the beautiful machine hurtling towards the stars, and a tear of bitter sorrow for the part of her that was traveling with it, unseen and unacknowledged. The initial weeks of the mission were flawless. The Odyssey probe performed perfectly, its systems stable, its journey smooth. News reports hailed it as a triumph of human ingenuity. Marcus Vance became a minor celebrity, giving interviews where he spoke eloquently about the precision of their models and the perfection of their plan. He never mentioned the girl from the archives. Alara became a footnote, then not even that. She was forgotten. She tried to move on. She tried to find interest in the ancient data she was tasked with preserving. She discovered stories of forgotten astronomers and unsung engineers, other ghosts in the machine. But her heart wasn't in it. Every night, she would go home to her small, sparse apartment and pull up the public data feed from Odyssey. The access was limited, a sanitized version for public consumption, but it was something. It was her only connection to the probe. She would watch the numbers scroll by, trying to hear the music, but her firewall from the core data was like listening to a symphony from behind a wall of soundproof glass. She could see the rhythm, but she couldn't hear the melody. And yet, she kept watch. It was a vigil. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but she felt a deep, unshakable certainty that the sour note she had heard in her simulation was still out there, waiting in the darkness. She was an outcast, a pariah, but she was still a guardian. She would not abandon her watch. The universe, it seemed, was about to prove her right. 3 months into the mission, the world was still celebrating. The Odyssey probe had just passed the orbit of Jupiter, heading for the outer darkness of the solar system. In mission control, a sense of comfortable routine had settled in. The initial adrenaline had faded, replaced by the steady, patient work of monitoring a long-haul flight. Marcus Vance's team was confident, almost cocky. Their models had been perfect. Their predictions, flawless. Commander Thorne, however, could not shake a persistent feeling of unease. She found herself rereading Alara's rejected report late at night, the girl's strange, poetic language about harmonic dissonance echoing in her mind. It was illogical, but the feeling lingered. Then, it happened. On a Tuesday morning, with no warning, the main screen in Mission Control, the one displaying the primary telemetry stream from Odyssey, went from a vibrant river of green data to a flat, terrifying line of static. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Alarms, silent for months, began to blare, a cacophony of electronic panic. What was that? What happened? Thorne's voice was sharp, cutting through the rising chatter. Marcus Vance was at her side in an instant, his face pale, his composure shattered for the first time. I don't know. Comms just dropped. All channels. Primary, secondary, backup, everything is dead status. Thorne demanded, her eyes locked on the wall of static. Full signal loss, Commander, a technician called out. We're getting nothing but background radiation. It's like it just vanished. Panic began to ripple through the room. The world's most advanced, most expensive piece of technology had simply disappeared in the middle of deep space. Marcus immediately began barking orders. Check for micrometeoroid impacts. Run a diagnostic on the high-gain antenna. Did we pass through any debris fields? His team scrambled, their fingers flying across keyboards, running the protocols they had drilled 100 times. But every check came back negative. There was no impact. No equipment malfunction on their end. No solar flare. The probe had been in a stretch of seemingly empty, stable space. The models showed nothing. The equations that had been their gospel now offered only blank pages. For hours they worked, a frantic, desperate energy filling the room. They sent command prompts into the void, listening for a reply that never came. The silence from 600 million miles away was deafening. It was an abyss that swallowed their questions and offered nothing in return. The pressure from Washington and other international partners began to mount. The world was watching. The triumph was threatening to become a global embarrassment, a monumental failure. Marcus grew increasingly agitated. His models, his perfect equations, had failed him. The universe had thrown him a problem he couldn't solve, and his arrogance began to crumble, replaced by a raw, defensive anger. It must be a catastrophic hardware failure, he declared to Thorne, his voice tight. A cascade power failure. There's no other explanation. The shielding must have been breached by an untracked particle. Thorne stared at the screen, her mind racing. An untracked particle. A statistical anomaly. The words echoed Alara Vance's warning. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Could the shielding have been insufficient for the local conditions, she asked, her voice low, almost to herself. Marcus scoffed, his defensiveness flaring. Impossible. The shielding was over-engineered by 200%. It could withstand a solar flare at point-blank range. This was a freak event. A 1 in a billion chance, but Thorne wasn't listening to him anymore. She was remembering the look in Alara's eyes, the desperate certainty. She was remembering the report she had dismissed. She turned to her aide. Find me the file from Alara Vance. The archival technician. The one who brought us that solar wind analysis, the aide looked confused. Commander, her access was revoked. Her files were sealed, then unseal them, Thorne commanded, her voice like steel. Now, while panic reigned in mission control, half a world away, in the silent, dusty basement of a GSA substation, Alara Vance was leaning forward, her face inches from the grainy public feed monitor. She saw the same thing they did, the sudden, shocking silence. But she didn't feel panic. She felt a strange, chilling sense of validation. It's here, she thought. The sour note has arrived. The public feed was just static, but for Alara, it wasn't empty. Her mind, so attuned to the language of data, began to do what it did best. She didn't see an absence of signal, she saw a change in the nature of the silence itself. She ignored the frantic news tickers and the panicked blog posts. She closed her eyes and just listened. She let the raw, unprocessed noise from the public feed wash over her. To anyone else, it was a meaningless hiss. To her, it was a canvas. And on that canvas, she began to perceive the faintest of brushstrokes. A pattern. In her small, forgotten corner of the GSA empire, Alara began to work. Her firewalled status meant she had no access to the powerful diagnostic tools of mission control. She had only her outdated terminal, her own mind, and the thin stream of public-facing data, the digital crumbs dropped from the main table. It was like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a single, distorted echo heard through a thick wall. But for Alara, it was enough. The world saw chaos, she saw a new kind of order. The static wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pulse. It was incredibly faint, buried under layers of cosmic background noise, but it was there. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, not with the frantic energy of the technicians in Houston, but with the focused grace of a musician transcribing a complex piece. She wrote new algorithms on the fly, custom filters designed not to find the old signal, but to isolate the new pattern within the noise. She cross-referenced the static's subtle fluctuations with the last known data points of the probe's environment, the very plasma field she had predicted. The connection was immediate and undeniable. The probe hadn't gone silent. It had changed its language. The intense magnetic field of the plasma cloud had done something to the probe's communication systems. It hadn't broken them, it had altered them. The probe was no longer broadcasting on the wide, powerful frequency they expected. It was now communicating on a tight, compressed bandwidth, its signal modulated by the plasma field itself. The field wasn't an obstacle, it had become part of the instrument. It was as if a trumpet had suddenly learned to sing like a violin. The probe was screaming, but everyone was still listening for a shout. Alara's heart pounded with a fierce, exultant energy. This was it. This was the music she had been born to hear. She worked for 36 hours straight, fueled by lukewarm coffee from the break room machine, and a burning sense of purpose. Her small cubicle became a sanctuary of discovery. The dusty shelves of old data tapes seemed to stand guard around her, silent witnesses to her solitary genius. While in Houston, despair was setting in. Marcus Vance's team had exhausted every option. They had run every diagnostic. They had failed. The mood in mission control was grim. The multi-billion-dollar mission was being written off as a catastrophic loss. The political fallout was immense. Marcus, his reputation in tatters, was now advocating for a last-ditch, desperate measure. "We have one option left," he announced, his voice strained. "We can route all available power from the solar panels to the main transmitter, and send a hard reset command. It's a complete system wipe. It will force the probe back to its factory settings. It's a 10,000 to 1 shot. It could overload the power core and turn the whole thing into a piece of space junk. But it's the only chance we have." Commander Thorne looked at him, her face a mask of cold fury. "And it would wipe the entire data buffer from the encounter. Everything the probe recorded inside the cloud would be lost forever. If it even works, what choice do we have?" Marcus shot back, his desperation making him reckless. To just let it die out there? We have to try something. Thorne paced the floor, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Wiping the data felt like a desecration. It was an admission of defeat. At that moment, her aide rushed to her side, holding a tablet. "Commander, I found the Vance file. It was buried in a locked directory, but I got it." Thorne took the tablet, and her eyes flew across Alara's original report. She saw the warnings, the precise predictions of magnetic flux and resonance frequencies. It was all there. A map of the disaster, written weeks before it happened, and they had ignored it. A profound sense of shame and regret washed over her. They hadn't just been wrong, they had been arrogant. They had been blind. "Get me everything you can on this analyst, Alara Vance," Thorne ordered, her voice low and urgent. "Where is she now?" The aide's face fell. "That's the problem, Commander." She was reassigned to the old physical archives at the White Sands substation. Her network access is minimal. "She's completely firewalled from us." Thorne's jaw tightened. They had banished their Cassandra. The one person who saw the storm coming was now locked in the basement while the ship was sinking. "Get her on the phone," Thorne said. But it wasn't that simple. Alara was a ghost in the system, her official contact information buried under layers of administrative reassignment. Every attempt to reach her through official channels hit a dead end. Back in her archive, Alara had finished her analysis. She had the key. It was a complex frequency modulation sequence, a new handshake protocol designed to speak the probe's new language. It was elegant, brilliant, and utterly useless if she couldn't get it to the people who could use it. She knew what they would be thinking in mission control. She knew their protocols. They would be preparing for a hard reset. A blind, brute force attempt that would destroy the very discovery the probe had made. She was in a race against their ignorance. Time was running out. Alara stared at her screen, the solution glowing before her, a string of code that held the power to save the Odyssey mission. It was a key to a lock no one else knew existed. But she was trapped. Her basement office was a prison, the firewalls around her digital access as solid as concrete. She tried the official channels first. She composed a concise, urgent email to the General Mission Control inbox, attaching her findings. The subject line was stark: "Urgent, Odyssey probe solution." It was sent into the digital ether, only to receive an automated reply seconds later: "Your message has been blocked. Your security clearance does not permit communication with this address. Blocked." She was a non-person. She tried calling the main GSA switchboard, her voice tight with anxiety. "I need to speak with Commander Thorne or someone on the Odyssey command team." "It's an emergency," the operator on the other end was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the command team is in a level 1 lockdown. I can't put anyone through without proper authorization." "What is your name and department?" "Alara Vance, Archival." Before she could finish, the operator's tone shifted. "Oh, I see your file here. I'm sorry, Ms. Vance, but there's a flag on your profile. I'm not authorized to connect you." Click. The line went dead. A flag on her profile. Marcus hadn't just firewalled her, he had digitally blacklisted her. He had marked her as a nuisance, a crank. Every official door was slammed shut and bolted. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of her focus. She could see the clock on her screen ticking, each second a step closer to the inevitable, destructive hard reset. They would kill the probe because they couldn't hear it screaming. She looked around her dusty domain, at the shelves of old mission logs. These were the ghosts of past triumphs and failures, the forgotten stories of the agency. And in that moment an idea sparked. The old missions. The old protocols. Before the digital firewalls and automated gatekeepers, how did they communicate? She remembered cataloging the logs from the Apollo-Soyuz project, the first joint US-Soviet mission. She remembered notes about back-channel comms, emergency lines that bypassed the main switchboards, direct point-to-point links between critical personnel. They were relics of the Cold War, designed for absolute emergencies. Were they still active? It was a wild, desperate chance. She dove into the digital archives she still had access to, her fingers a blur. She searched for old network architecture diagrams, for decommissioned phone directories, for anything that might contain a ghost line. She was a digital archaeologist, digging for a lifeline in the ruins of old technology. Minutes stretched into an hour. In Houston, the final decision was being made. Marcus Vance stood before Commander Thorne, his face grim. The reset sequence is programmed. We've routed the power. It's ready. We just need your authorization. Commander Thorne stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the wall of static. Her gut screamed at her not to do it. Wiping the data felt like a violation. But what choice did she have? The world was demanding answers. Her superiors were demanding action. Doing nothing was no longer an option. Prepare to transmit on my mark, she said, her voice heavy with resignation. The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the computers and the faint, rhythmic ticking of the mission clock. A technician began the final countdown for the transmission. 5-4 in the archive, Elara found it. A single line in a 40-year-old technical manual. A direct line number labeled DIR, FLT, OPS. Emergency Director of Flight Operations. Thorne's position. It was a phone number, ancient by today's standards, probably disconnected decades ago. But it was her only shot. Her hands trembled as she picked up the old-fashioned desk phone, another relic, and dialed the number. She expected a dead tone, a fast busy signal, an automated message telling her the number was out of service. Instead, after a series of strange clicks and whirs, it rang. Once. Twice. In mission control, as the technician's voice called out, 3, 2, a shrill, unfamiliar ringing cut through the silence. It wasn't one of the sleek, modern comms units. It was coming from an old, forgotten phone terminal built into Thorne's command console, a piece of legacy hardware no one had touched in years. Everyone froze. Thorne stared at the blinking red light on the ancient device. No one had that number. No one should have that number. On instinct, she slammed her hand down on a large red button on her console. Hold the countdown, she roared. The technician froze, his finger hovering over the transmit key. Thorne snatched the receiver of the ringing phone. This is Thorne, Commander. Elara's voice came through the line, thin and crackling with static, but alive with a desperate urgency. Commander, don't send the reset. You can't. The probe isn't broken. Thorne's blood ran cold. It was the girl. The ghost from the archives. Vance? How did you get this number? It doesn't matter, Elara pleaded, her words tumbling out. Listen to me. The probe is talking, but you're not listening on the right frequency. The plasma field altered the transmission protocol. It's using the static, modulating the noise. It's not broken, it's evolved. The reset will destroy everything. The discovery isn't the data it gathered before the silence. The silence is the discovery. A stunned silence fell over mission control. Every eye was on Commander Thorne, who stood frozen, the archaic phone receiver pressed to her ear. Through the crackling line, Elara's voice was a torrent of information. She wasn't speaking in metaphors about music anymore, she was spitting out precise technical specifications, frequency modulations, and lines of code. It was a language of pure, unassailable data, delivered with the passion of a prophet. The carrier wave collapsed, but the signal is still there, embedded in the quantum noise of the background radiation, Elara explained, her voice gaining strength and clarity with every word. You're looking for a mountain, but it's a whisper. You need to apply a fractal decompression algorithm to the raw static feed. I've written it. I can send it to you. It will act as a key, a digital Rosetta Stone. It will translate the noise back into telemetry. Marcus Vance stepped forward, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Commander, this is insane. She's a disgruntled technician who we disciplined for this exact kind of fantasy. She's babbling nonsense about fractal algorithms and talking static. We are wasting precious time. We need to send the reset now. He reached for the transmit control, but Thorne shot him a glare so ferocious it stopped him in his tracks. Stand down, Marcus, she said, her voice lethally quiet. She turned her attention back to the phone. Ms. Vance. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Alara said, her voice ringing with a conviction that transcended the static on the line. I can hear it, Commander. I can see the patterns. Please, you have to trust me. You ignored me once. Don't do it again, the words struck Thorne like a physical blow. You ignored me once. The weight of her earlier dismissal, of her failure to listen, settled heavily on her shoulders. She had chosen the safety of consensus over the risk of intuition, and it had led them to this precipice of failure. She had a choice. On one hand, the logical, desperate, but destructive plan proposed by her top strategist. On the other, the wild, impossible theory from a firewalled junior analyst who had been right before. All her training, all her experience, told her to trust her team, to trust the established hierarchy. But her gut, the same gut that had kept her alive in the vacuum of space, was screaming at her to trust the ghost on the line. She looked at the wall of static, then at the furious face of Marcus Vance, and finally at the hopeful, terrified faces of her team. She was the commander. This was her call. And in that moment, she decided she would rather fail by taking a leap of faith than succeed by an act of destruction. Send me the algorithm, Ms. Vance, Thorne said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. How? Alara asked, the reality of her isolation suddenly returning. My email is blocked. Thorne didn't hesitate. I'm giving you a direct override. Right now, she turned to her communications officer. Open a secure channel. Patch it through to archival substation White Sands, terminal ID 7, Gamma 9. Grant full, top-level access to user Alara Vance. Now. The officer's eyes widened. Commander, that's a level 5 clearance. I can't, that is a direct order. Thorne thundered, her voice echoing through the silent room. The officer flinched and immediately began typing, his fingers flying across the keys. Marcus was apoplectic. Eva, you can't do this. You are compromising mission security based on the ramblings of a sanctioned employee. You are throwing away our last chance. Our last chance was lost when we stopped listening, Thorne retorted, her eyes boring into his. We are going to try it her way. In the basement, a notification flashed on Alara's screen, secure channel open. Access granted. A wave of relief so profound it made her dizzy washed over her. She took a deep breath, her fingers poised over her keyboard. She attached the file, the elegant, intricate key she had forged in the dark, and hit send. A second later, a confirmation pinged in mission control. We have the file, Commander, the comms officer announced. It's a compression algorithm. I've never seen anything like its structure. Load it, Thorne commanded. Patch the raw static feed through it and display the output on the main screen. Marcus threw his hands up in disgust. This is a circus. I want it on the record that I advised against this course of action. This is your responsibility, Commander. It always has been, Marcus, Thorne replied coolly, her eyes never leaving the main screen. The technicians worked quickly, their movements now precise and focused, driven by their commander's unwavering resolve. The screen flickered. The wall of static vanished, replaced by a command line interface. They had loaded Alara's algorithm. Algorithm running, a technician called out. Decompression in progress. The room held its breath. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Nothing happened. The screen remained blank. A low murmur of doubt started to spread. Marcus let out a short, bitter laugh. Well, that was an interesting diversion. Shall we get back to reality and send the reset? Even Thorne's resolve seemed to flicker. Had she made a catastrophic mistake? Had she bet everything on a ghost story? Then, a single pixel on the screen blinked. Then another. A line of code appeared. Then another. It was garbled, nonsensical. It's just junk data, Marcus sneered. But Alara, still on the open line from her basement, whispered, wait for it. It's calibrating. It's learning the language, and then, it happened. The garbled text resolved. A single, perfect line of code appeared, stark and clear against the black screen, Odyssey probe. Nominal. Awaiting command. A collective, unified gasp swept through the room. It was followed by a beat of stunned silence, and then, an explosion of cheers and applause. People were hugging, crying, shouting in disbelief. It was a resurrection. On the main screen, data began to pour in. Not the familiar green telemetry, but something new. It was a flood of information so complex, so beautiful, it looked like a work of art. It was a detailed map of the plasma field, but more than that, it was data on quantum-level energy fluctuations within the cloud, something they had never theorized was possible to measure. The probe hadn't just survived the anomaly, it had used the anomaly to make the single greatest astronomical discovery of the century. The silence hadn't been a problem. It had been the answer. Thorne sank into her chair, the phone still clutched in her hand, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at the beautiful, impossible data streaming onto her screen. Alara, she whispered into the phone, her voice thick with emotion. You did it. You saved it all in the dusty archive, half a world away. Alara leaned back in her chair, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she could hear the symphony again, louder and more beautiful than ever before. The aftermath in Mission Control was a whirlwind of joyous chaos. The discovery was monumental, rewriting entire chapters of astrophysics textbooks overnight. The Odyssey probe, now communicating fluently in its new language, was a hero, a technological marvel that had not just endured but adapted. But as the initial euphoria began to subside, a new awareness settled over the room. The true marvel wasn't just the probe. It was the forgotten analyst in the basement who had listened to the silence. Commander Thorne, her composure regained, stood and addressed her team. Her voice, though quiet, carried to every corner of the room. Today, we nearly made the biggest mistake in the history of this agency. We were blind and we were deaf, and we were saved by one person who we refused to listen to. The person who truly saved this mission is not in this room. She looked directly at Marcus Vance, whose face was ashen. He had shrunk into himself, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who had been proven catastrophically wrong. He avoided her gaze, staring at the floor, the architect of a failure that had almost been. Thorne then turned to her aide. Get me a jet. I'm going to White Sands. And prepare a full promotion and transfer order for Alara Vance. Her new title is Director of Special Projects, Odyssey Mission. Her new office is next to mine. And her security clearance is now Alpha 1. Is that understood? The aide nodded, a wide grin spreading across his face. Yes, Commander. Loud and clear. The flight to the remote New Mexico substation was a period of deep reflection for Thorne. She thought about the rigid hierarchies, the culture of dismissal, the arrogance that had almost cost them everything. They had built an organization that celebrated stars like Marcus Vance while burying its most precious gems like Alara in the dirt. They had mistaken pedigree for potential and confidence for competence. She had been a part of that system. But no more. When Thorne's jet landed, Alara was waiting for her on the tarmac. She had been summoned from her basement archive by the substation's bewildered manager, who had suddenly been inundated with calls from GSA headquarters. She stood there in her simple, worn uniform, looking small and out of place against the backdrop of the sleek private jet. As Thorne descended the steps, the two women faced each other. The commander, a titan of the industry, and the analyst, the ghost from the machine. There was a moment of silence, the desert wind whipping around them. Thorne didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she stepped forward and pulled Alara into a firm, heartfelt hug. "I came here to say two things," Thorne said, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely showed. "First, thank you. You saved us from our own foolishness. You saved the dream." Alara was too overwhelmed to speak, simply nodding into the commander's shoulder. "And second," Thorne continued, pulling back to look Alara in the eye. "I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry that I didn't listen. I failed you." "That will never happen again," Alara finally found her voice, though it was just a whisper. "You listened when it mattered." Thorne smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her stern features. "Come with me. We have a mission to run. And from now on, you're not just going to be a part of it. You're going to help lead it." The return to the GSA main campus was a surreal experience for Alara. When she walked back into mission control, this time alongside Commander Thorne, the room fell silent. But it wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was a silence of awe and respect. The technicians and scientists who had once looked through her now looked at her with undisguised admiration. As she passed Marcus Vance's former station, now conspicuously empty, she felt not a shred of triumph, only a quiet sense of purpose. Her new office was spacious, with a window that looked out not onto a dusty corridor but up at the sky. On her desk was a new terminal, the most powerful in the agency. Her first official act as Director of Special Projects was to integrate the old archival data systems with the main mission servers, ensuring that the ghosts of the past would always have a voice in the future. She became Thorne's most trusted advisor. Her unique ability to hear the music in the data was no longer a secret to be hidden, but a celebrated and essential tool. She led the team that deciphered the incredible wealth of information coming from Odyssey, pioneering a new field of resonance astronomy. She found she was not just a listener but a teacher. She helped other analysts learn to look beyond the obvious, to find the patterns in the noise, to respect the whispers and the anomalies. The culture of the GSA began to change, slowly but surely. It became a place that valued intuition as much as intellect, a place where a good idea could come from anywhere, from the commander's chair to the archivist's desk. Alara Vance, the girl who was once invisible, had become the agency's guiding light. She never lost her humility, her quiet nature. But she now walked with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from a deep, unshakable knowledge of her own worth. She had found her voice, and in doing so, had helped an entire organization find its way. The Odyssey probe continued its journey into the darkness, a silent testament to the girl who had listened to its song, a symbol of a dream that was almost lost, but was saved by the one person they thought didn't matter. So, what does this story teach us? It reminds us that worth is not determined by a title, a uniform, or an office location. True genius can be found in the most unexpected places, in the quiet corners we so often overlook. Alara was a ghost in the system, a junior technician buried in a basement, but her mind held the key to the universe. They cut her from the mission, they silenced her voice, they built walls to keep her out. But they couldn't extinguish the fire of her talent. They couldn't stop her from listening. This story is a testament to the power of seeing people. Really seeing them. Commander Thorne's ultimate triumph wasn't just saving the probe, it was her decision to finally look past the hierarchy and trust the human being who had the answer. It was her courage to admit she was wrong and to lift someone up, rather than push them down. And what of Marcus Vance? He represents the cynical gatekeeper in all our lives. The voice of arrogance and doubt that tells us we don't belong, that our ideas are worthless, that we should stay in our lane. His failure was a failure of imagination, a belief that the only answers that mattered were the ones that came from established authority. He built his world on rigid models, and when the universe presented something new, his world crumbled. He couldn't see the music, he could only hear the noise. The most critical moments in our lives are often choices between the comfortable certainty of the status quo and the frightening uncertainty of a new idea. It is in those moments that we must choose to listen to the whispers, to trust the unconventional voice, to bet on the hidden gem. Alara's journey from the basement to the command center is a journey we can all aspire to. Not necessarily in a literal sense, but in the journey from self-doubt to self-worth. It is the courage to believe in your own unique perception, even when the world tells you you're crazy. It is the resilience to keep working, to keep watching, to keep listening, even after the doors have been slammed in your face. It is the quiet confidence that your contribution matters, no matter how small your role may seem. The universe is always speaking to us in data, in nature, in the people around us. But like the team at Mission Control, we are often listening for a shout when the truth is being delivered in a whisper. Who are the Alara Vances in your life? The quiet coworker with brilliant ideas, the overlooked family member with profound wisdom, the service worker whose sharp observations go unnoticed. We all have the power to be a Commander Thorne, to be the one who finally stops and listens, who sees the potential that everyone else has dismissed. We can choose to lift people up, to open the door for them, to give their ideas a chance to save the day. The world is full of invisible people with extraordinary gifts. Today, let's make it our mission to see them. Share this story with someone you believe in, someone whose voice deserves to be heard. Remind them that even when they feel invisible, their symphony is just waiting for the right person to listen. Comment below and tell us about a time someone believed in you when no one else would, or a time you saw the hidden talent in another. Because every great discovery, every saved mission, every single triumph of the human spirit begins with the simple, powerful act of paying attention.